So in addition to the main story dungeons, Echoes of Wisdom also has a handful of optional mini dungeons spread out throughout the world of Hyrule. These are great little side adventures that offer some genuinely worthwhile rewards, such as unique gear and heart pieces. So before we get to the end of the game, I wanted to highlight these real quick, since I genuinely think these are fun little inclusions in an already densely packed game. So let's hop into it. The first of these mini dungeons that you are likely to encounter, based on its location and the lower amount of prerequisites, is the Eastern Temple, which can be completed pretty much any time after Southern Ruins. There's an archaeologist outside the temple entrance named Sago, who has been hearing voices from inside the structure, and it's up to us to investigate. I'm particularly fond of this one's inclusion, since the Eastern Temple is actually the same building that we have previously known as the Eastern Palace, the very same Eastern Palace that was the first full-length dungeon of A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds. This version of the iconic structure is of course substantially scaled down here, but it's a little bonus treat, not a full-length dungeon. So that's okay. The temple has its own unique architecture and color palette, and I think it really looks great with the purple tiles and green walls. It evokes the original without being exactly the same thing that we've already seen a couple of times already. The main puzzle mechanic here has us using bind to move objects and these spark enemies around in order to feed the sparks into these yellow boxes, which will open the way forward. These start out pretty straightforward, but do become a little more complicated as they iterate on the idea, including having bars separate you from the puzzle itself, meaning you've got to spawn your echoes on the other side and move them into position with bind. It's pretty cool. Not only is this a fun puzzle mechanic on its own, but it also serves as a sort of tutorial for the boss fight. This is Smog, who is actually a returning boss, previously only seen in Oracle of Ages. Smog will break into smaller, smoggy boys, which you need to make collide into each other, as he'll only be vulnerable in his complete form. Basically the opposite of Slime Eye, who needed to be broken apart. When we fought Smog in Oracle of Ages, we had to use the Cane of Sumaria to place blocks in his path to achieve this, which was a perfect dungeon item use case, honestly. Spawning echoes is, in some ways, the Cane of Sumaria taken to its most logical extreme, so Smog really is a perfect fit for this game, though there are enough objects in this room already that we can use bind with to move into position and achieve this. Still, what a seamless way to incorporate a throwback boss. Smog's behavior didn't need to be altered in any way to make this fight work, because we have the tools we need already at our disposal. A perfect adaptation. Anyways, I find this fight a lot of fun. It's just as much a puzzle as it is a battle, which is already something I like when Zelda games do, but it's very fitting for a game with wisdom in the title, you know? The next mini dungeon is the Wrecked Ship. This guy in Seaside Village will give you the quest to evict the electric monster that has taken residency in his boat. This one might be my favorite of the game's mini dungeons, to be honest. In every playthrough, I'm always surprised by how expansive it really is, though still not full dungeon length, of course. As the name implies, it's a vessel in disrepair, and it looks and feels the part, with broken wooden beams and water flooding large portions of the ship. This one doesn't have as strong of a core dungeon mechanic as the Eastern Temple, but it's still pretty fun to comb through, though I'm not really sure about the inclusion of this side-scrolling cave section. I guess we're meant to be briefly leaving the ship to explore an attached underwater cave and then re-entering the boat elsewhere, but I guess it just feels a little out of place. A lot of the puzzles here involve either clearing away crates or using the object objects around to create a path forward, though that idea gets a little undermined by having echoes of your own to use for those purposes. Still, there's a nice mind puzzle here that feels like a direct follow-up from the ones introduced in Southern. The wrecked ship instead has more of an action focus, with tons of enemies in nearly every room. So between the combat and the vibes, I just find this place to be a really enjoyable little excursion. The boss here is also superbly fun. I actually thought that this was a redesigned Baronade. You know, the boss from Jabu Jabu's Belly in Ocarina of Time. The behavior is basically identical. It surrounds itself with Biri and spins around to attack. So I just assumed that they altered the appearance of Baronade to fit this change in setting, and align the boss itself with the Biri that it employs. But according to both Zelda Dungeon and Zelda Wiki, both sources I trust, this is actually a new boss called Bori. But Bori here is basically Baronade 2.0, minus the spikes. That said, I really enjoy this boss, despite it being a bit on the easy side, especially if you come equipped with a smoothie that gives you the lightning proof effect. Lots of fun, nonetheless. In the Faron wetlands, a little Deku scrub will send us into the hidden ruins to pursue rumors of cotton candy. The hidden ruins are something of a follow-up to the Eastern Temple, though using the same aesthetics and architectural style that we saw in Faron Temple. Though I can't complain because I think it looks great. The puzzles here use the same core concept that we saw in Eastern Temple though, guiding sparks into these yellow switch boxes, though these ones are a bit more complicated, including more enemies and having a few of these puzzles in these side-scrolling rooms. Although Eastern Temple had rooms in this perspective, they didn't contain any of these yellow box puzzles, so now we get to try some from that perspective and underwater to boot. This ends in a rematch against Smog, which likewise occurs in a side-scrolling room, rather than top-down like last time. The fight goes pretty well the same as before, aside from using the room layout's verticality. It's a good fight, but more of the same, so I won't really dwell on it, though I appreciate the humor of that Deku scrub mistaking Smog for cotton candy and then outright refusing to believe you when you tell him the truth. Classic Deku. The Summit Cave is the last of the mini-dungeons, and it might be the least memorable of the bunch if you ask me. We hear that Darston went up to a cave near the top of Elden Volcano, but hasn't been seen in a while. We'll find him investigating rumors of a fire giant, so we just go on ahead to check it out. This isn't a bad mini-dungeon, but I feel like it lacks the unique flavor and settings that the others have, to the point where despite being 3 entire 100% playthroughs deep into this game, I keep forgetting this place even exists. The cave aesthetic is stuff we've already seen, and a lot of the puzzles are kinda just rehashed stuff we've seen in Elden Temple. You know, rock climbing, using lava rocks for platforms on rising magma, and avoiding getting set on fire. Normal stuff. Man, what varnish do they use on these ladders though? Like I said, it isn't a bad mini-dungeon, but it kind of blends into the other caves around Elden, whereas the other dungeons at least stood out either with unique theming or puzzle mechanics. The lack of all that makes this one feel just a little unimpressive by comparison. It doesn't help that this is the only mini-dungeon that doesn't have a unique boss battle. The boss here is the Igneo-Talus. Volcanic Talus. It is pretty much exactly the same as the Seismic Talus that we fought back in Southern, except, you know, hotter. Though I don't want to sell this fight short. Despite being iterative, the added fire and more aggressive attack cycle does make this a substantially more challenging boss than its southern counterpart. He doesn't linger at the end of his attack animations for nearly as long, making it way more difficult to get a lock on his weak point and use bind. He just attacks relentlessly. I kind of love it. This guy is definitely harder than the other mini-dungeon bosses, and may even be tougher than any of the main story dungeon bosses, aside from perhaps the game's final boss. And that's really cool. I like it. I just also find it weirdly forgettable. And that probably comes down to the fact that it's basically a rehash along with everything else in this mini dungeon. So that covers it, I think. Those are the mini dungeons, which I think are overall quite good, especially for optional side content. Their inclusion makes the world feel a little more fleshed out and robust, and the rewards are generally pretty good. Not all of the gear is super useful. The Deku charm is particularly good though, but even still I enjoy collecting unique goodies like this. And hey, they all have heart pieces, so that would make them worthwhile to me already. The unique gear is just a great little bonus. These are obviously not as in-depth as the main story dungeons, but they're not supposed to be either. I think they serve a particular purpose, and for the most part, I think they pull it off excellently.